Imagine a Viking army. You see the shields, the axes, the ships. You hear the battle cries. Now, imagine 50,000 of these warriors. That is not a raiding party. That is a city on the move. A massive force, like the Great Heathen Army that invaded England in the 9th century. They did not just fight and leave. They stayed. For months, sometimes for years. They built camps. They settled in. They lived. And that is where our question begins. A simple, human question. How did 50,000 Vikings use the toilet? It sounds almost comical, but it is one of the most serious questions of warfare. An army that cannot solve this basic problem does not conquer kingdoms. It dies in its own filth. Disease would claim more lives than any Saxon sword ever could. So how did they do it? The answer is not about individual bravery. It is not about secret techniques. The answer is organization. The Vikings, often seen as chaotic raiders, were in fact highly pragmatic organizers. Their survival depended on a system for sanitation. This system began with the most important decision: where to camp. A Viking army on the move was not a random horde. Scouts would have looked for specific features. They needed a defendable position, near water and resources, but they also needed the right terrain for sanitation. The land itself was their first tool. The ideal camp was on a slope, a gentle hill. The living areas, the tents, the longhouses would be placed on the higher ground. And this was crucial. All human waste, all garbage, had to flow away from where people lived, ate, and slept. So, the waste areas were always placed downhill. Gravity became their silent sanitation worker. Wind direction was just as important. The prevailing winds in England and Ireland come from the southwest. The Vikings would have noticed this. They would have placed their latrines, their waste pits, downwind, so that the smell and any invisible sickness in the air was carried away from the camp, not into it. This was not advanced science. It was careful observation. It was common sense, applied on a massive scale. The most critical rule of all involved water. Every person needs water, every day. 50,000 people need a river, or a large stream. The location of the water source dictated everything. The camp's latrines were always, without exception, placed downstream, far downstream. The drinking water was collected from a point upstream, well above the camp. This created a simple, one-way flow. Clean water in from upstream, waste carried away downstream. This separation was the cornerstone of Viking camp hygiene. Cooking areas where food was prepared were kept close to the clean water source. Sleeping areas were upwind and uphill. And the latrine area was in its own zone, downhill, downwind, and downstream. This zoning was not written in a manual. It was knowledge passed down, enforced by experience. The penalty for fouling the wrong area was not just discussed. It was sickness, weakness, and death for the entire army. Archaeology shows us this system in action. Take the Viking camp that became the city of Jorvik, what we now call York. This was a major settlement for the Great Heathen Army. Excavations there reveal a clear pattern. The Viking structures, the workshops and homes cluster in certain areas. And in other areas, away from the living quarters, archaeologists find distinct pits. These are not storage pits or trash pits for normal garbage. These are latrine pits. They are often found near the edges of the settled area, close to waterways but carefully positioned. The soil in these pits is different. It contains a very specific kind of historical evidence. It contains what the Vikings left behind. For an archaeologist, this is a treasure trove. It tells the story of daily life and of health. It shows us that the Vikings were not just dumping waste anywhere. They were concentrating it, containing it, in designated places. This was the first layer of their sanitation system, the organization of space, using the landscape as a tool, creating invisible lines between clean and dirty, between health and disease. It was a silent, constant battle, one fought not with axes, but with careful planning. The success of a Viking army, its ability to stay in the field for a season or for years, depended on winning this battle every single day. But creating the right zone was only the beginning. The next challenge was the structure itself. What did a toilet for 50,000 people actually look like? The answer is found in those same pits, and it is more sophisticated than you might think. The designated zone was established. A downhill, downwind, downstream area for waste. Now, the practical work began. For an individual, nature provides a simple solution, but for a concentrated group of thousands, nature becomes the enemy. Without management, the ground itself becomes poisoned. The solution was engineering on a basic, brutal scale. The latrine pit. Archaeology at Viking sites shows us these pits clearly. They were not shallow holes. They were substantial excavations, deep enough to contain waste for a large number of men, for a period of time. Their size and number tell a story of calculation. The camp leaders had to estimate needs. How many men? How long will we stay? The answers determined how many pits were dug and where. The digging was likely a duty for younger warriors or thralls, slaves captured in battle. It was hard, unglamorous labor, but it was vital labor. The pits were often lined or reinforced with whatever was available: wicker, wood, or stone. This prevented the sides from collapsing. It kept the waste contained. This containment was the entire point. But a simple pit has problems. It is messy, it is exposed, and in the crowded conditions of a camp, it needed to serve many people efficiently. The Viking answer was the plank. Excavations, particularly in the waterlogged soils of places like Dublin and York, have revealed evidence of wooden structures over these pits. Simple, thick planks of oak or ash. These planks were laid across the top of the pit. They created a stable platform. A warrior could stand or squat over the pit, using the planks for balance. This was a communal toilet. There were no private stalls. Privacy was a luxury a military camp could not afford. The focus was on function, on throughput. Multiple men could use the facility at once. This was sanitation as logistics. The plank served another critical purpose. It helped control smell and flies. By covering much of the pit's opening, it limited the exposure of the waste to the open air. This made the area slightly more bearable, and it helped slow the spread of disease carried by insects. Again, this was not about comfort. It was about maintaining a functional fighting force. A warrior weakened by dysentery is no warrior at all, but these pits were not permanent. They filled up. This was the next logistical challenge. What do you do with a full latrine pit? The Vikings had a standard procedure. When a pit was nearing capacity, it was deliberately taken out of service. The first step was covering it. Soil, ash from campfires and other clean earth was shoveled back into the pit. This sealed it. This burial served multiple purposes. It trapped the smell. It prevented anyone from accidentally falling in. And most importantly, it began a natural process of decomposition. The waste would slowly break down in the earth. Then, a new pit was dug nearby. The camp's latrine zone would slowly expand, a patchwork of fresh pits and buried old ones. This cycle of dig, use, fill, and cover was a continuous routine. It was a core part of camp maintenance, as important as sharpening axes or mending ships. The evidence for this routine is not just in the shape of the pits. It is in the soil itself. Scientists can analyze the layers within a filled pit. They can see the sequence, the initial waste layer, then the deliberate cap of clean soil. Sometimes they find multiple sequences. A pit was partially filled, covered, then reopened and used again later. This shows adaptation. It shows the camp evolving over time. And within that preserved soil, archaeologists find the most intimate evidence of all: the biological signature of the Viking army. They find parasite eggs, microscopic eggs from intestinal worms, specifically whipworm and roundworm. This is a crucial discovery. It tells us two opposing things. First, it proves these pits were used as latrines. The evidence is undeniable. Second, the presence of these parasites tells us the system was not perfect. Despite the organization, despite the pits and planks, infection was common. These parasites spread through contaminated soil. A warrior might clean his hands inadequately. Food might fall on the ground. The eggs would be ingested, and the cycle would continue. The sanitation system managed the waste on a massive scale, but it could not create modern hygiene. Sickness was a constant camp follower. Yet the very fact that these eggs are found concentrated in the pits is proof the system was working. The parasites were contained in the waste zone. They were not scattered throughout the entire camp. Without the pits, the infection rate would have been catastrophic. The system was a damage limitation exercise, and for its time, it was remarkably effective. The latrine pit was the heart of the system, but it was only part of the story. Waste from the body was one thing. The camp generated other waste: food scraps, animal bones, broken tools, and the general debris of thousands of lives. This too had to be managed, and it followed a similar principle. Designated areas. Often distinct from the latrine pits, there were refuse pits, places for general trash. This separation is important. It shows a nuanced understanding of different types of waste. Human waste was the highest priority for containment. General refuse was less immediately dangerous, but still needed to be controlled to prevent attracting scavengers and pests. The camp, therefore, had a geography of disposal, different pits for different purposes, all following the same rule: away from living spaces, away from water. This was the daily reality, the routine of waste management. It was unending work. It was dirty work, but it was the work that allowed the army to exist. It was the foundation upon which their military power was built. Without the pit and the plank, there would be no Great Heathen Army. There would only be a sick and dying mob. But organization and infrastructure can only go so far. They create the framework. The final and perhaps most difficult element was human behavior. How do you make 50,000 independent-minded warriors follow these rules? The answer lies not in technology, but in discipline. The pits were dug, the planks were laid, the zones were established. But a system is only as strong as the people who follow it. You can have perfect sanitation engineering, and it will fail if 1 in 10 warriors ignores the rules. For a Viking army of 50,000, discipline was not about uniform drills. It was about collective survival, and it was enforced by the most powerful force in the camp: social pressure. In a Viking war band, reputation was everything. A warrior's status came from his bravery, his skill, and his reliability. But reliability meant more than standing firm in the shield wall. It meant being a good member of the community. In the close, crowded confines of the camp, your actions affected everyone. The man who relieved himself upstream of the water source was not just being lazy. He was poisoning his brothers. He was undermining the entire army. Such an act would not have been met with a formal trial. It would have been met with immediate and brutal social condemnation. Shame was a powerful weapon. He would be called out. He would be mocked. He might be beaten. His share of food and plunder could be threatened. In a society built on honor and mutual dependence, being labeled a fool who brought sickness was a devastating stigma. This peer enforcement was the first and most effective layer of discipline. Leadership played a crucial role. The chieftains and kings leading these great armies were not just battlefield commanders. They were managers of a large, mobile community. It was in their direct interest to maintain a healthy force. They, or their trusted huskarls, would have delegated the supervision of the camp. Certain individuals would have been tasked with overseeing the latrine zones, ensuring new pits were dug before old ones overflowed, enforcing the downstream rule. This was likely one of the duties for those managing the camp's logistics. The same people organizing food supplies and guard rotations would have monitored sanitation. Their authority came from the top. A direct order from a jarl about where to place latrines carried the weight of his authority. Disobeying was not just a breach of camp rules, it was insubordination. Routine was the engine of this discipline. The camp's daily life followed patterns. The patterns made the rules automatic. Men would wake, they would eat, they would train, and they would attend to their needs. The path to the latrine zone became a familiar track. The sight of others using the designated pits reinforced the norm. It became simply what we do here. This routine normalized the system. It turned a complex logistical problem into a simple habit. The environment itself was a constant teacher. The stench from a poorly placed latrine was immediate feedback. The sight of a comrade writhing with stomach cramps was a grim lesson. The Vikings were practical observers of cause and effect. They may not have understood germ theory, but they understood correlation. They knew that foul smells and dirty water led to sickness. The evidence was all around them. This practical understanding fostered a collective buy-in to the system. It was not arbitrary rule. It was visible, common sense. But let's be clear, this discipline had limits. The archaeological evidence of parasite eggs proves this. Perfect compliance was impossible. In the dark, in the rain, a tired warrior might take a shortcut. In the chaos of a sudden alarm, routines broke down. The system was designed to withstand these lapses, not to prevent every single one. The goal was containment, to ensure that most waste went to the right place, most of the time. And the discipline of the camp achieved that. This entire structure, the organization of space, the engineering of pits, the social discipline, created a remarkable result. It allowed a force of unprecedented size to operate on foreign soil for extended periods. The Great Heathen Army did not just raid. It overwintered. It settled. It negotiated from a position of permanent strength. Their sanitation system was a key, unsung factor in that political power. An army that is constantly sick cannot hold territory. An army that manages its basic human functions can. The Viking camp, therefore, was a paradox. It was a place of brutal warfare and meticulous daily order. The same culture that produced terrifying berserkers also produced careful camp planners. They understood that true strength was holistic. It was not just the strength of your arm, it was the strength of your community, the strength of your logistics, the strength to keep 50,000 men functional. When we look at a Viking artifact, like a sword or a brooch, we see a symbol of their power. But the true symbol of their logistical achievement is far more humble. It is a dark, soil-filled pit on the outskirts of an ancient camp. It is a simple wooden plank, now rotted away. These were the foundations of empire. They represent the unglamorous, essential work of survival, the work that happens between battles. The Vikings feared many things: the wrath of the gods, the loss of honor, defeat in battle. But they also feared the invisible enemy that thrived in filth. And their response to that fear was not magic or prayer. It was system, routine, and discipline. They organized the landscape. They engineered simple solutions. They enforced communal rules. In doing so, they solved one of history's oldest military problems. They kept the army in the field. So the next time you picture a Viking, picture not just the warrior in the shield wall. Picture him walking a well-trodden path, downhill and downwind, to a designated place. Picture him as part of a vast, living machine. A machine that had to manage every aspect of life, including the most basic ones. Because conquest is not just about taking land, it is about holding it. And you cannot hold anything if you are not first able to hold your camp together. What other daily realities of history are hidden in plain sight, waiting to be understood? If you found this journey into the unseen mechanics of the past interesting, consider subscribing for more. Our next exploration might just change how you see another forgotten routine of history.